Boardroom Bound, Episode 21, The 3 Biggest Mistakes in a Board Interview with Matt Craven.
All the way through the interview, he kept talking about what we had done, i.e. him and his team. I gave him feedback and I said, look, that's great, but I want to know what you did, what you owned, what you delivered, not what your team did, because there's no vacancy for your team.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder that you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And today we'll once again be talking with Matt Craven. Now, Matt is a personal branding and career development expert. He's the founder of the CV and Interview Advisors, as well as LinkedIn Incredible. In short, Matt helps aspiring and existing board members to sell themselves more effectively and secure more director roles. In today's show, Matt is going to be continuing the unpacking of the skill set that we all need to be successful. He joined us in episode 13 to talk about building a board resume. A month ago in episode 17, we talked about personal branding, thought leadership, especially your LinkedIn profile. And today we're going to be talking about executive level interview technique. And the questions and comments are going to be a little bit different than what you'd expected if you were working at a lower level in a company or even perhaps in the C-suite. Matt is going to talk us through the biggest mistakes that senior people make in interviews. He's going to give us strategies to be better, the keys to successful interviewing. And he's also going to give us answers to the difficult questions like, tell me about yourself, or do you have any questions for us? I can't wait for all the information Matt's going to share again. Let's jump into the show. Matt Craven, delighted to have you back. This is the third installment of a monthly series about giving our audience practical ideas and guides and expertise about how to position yourself, knowing many of us are aspiring board members for that opportunity to roll in. Today, we're going to be talking all about executive level interview techniques. So, Matt, welcome back.
Yeah, hi, Alexander. Great to be back again. I think we've got some really useful stuff today, actually. The interview technique. Hopefully everybody's put into practice what we said last month and the month before, and they've got lots of interviews going on. So hopefully this is quite timely for a lot of people.
Well, we've covered so much. On episode 13, we did such a deep dive into the resume, and then on 17, we spent so much time on the personal branding and the thought leadership and LinkedIn. And so if those have been very successful, and obviously there's a bit of a lag time to get that out there, but it will eventually lead to opportunities to interview for boards. And we want to talk through that today because it's not exactly like it was when you were interviewing for what we'll call a normal job. And maybe we should just start by the footfalls, the biggest mistakes that senior people make when they go to these types of interviews.
Yeah, well, regardless of whether they're looking for a board director, advisory, or non-exec director role, or a full-time position, I think the same mistakes happen time and time again. And for me, there are three. And the first one, and I think this is people falling victim to their own success. You know, as we get more senior, more experienced, better at what we do, we naturally become the leaders. We might become parents, we might become a coach. So we're used to the people giving the direction and the knowledge and the advice, and we actually become quite bad listeners. We become very good talkers, but terrible listeners.
My wife would say that about me sometimes, I'm sure.
Mine too, probably. But if you think about how this plays out in an interview, you're sat there and somebody's asking you a question. And what we naturally do as more senior people is we're not listening. We're just hearing. We're just hearing the words. And we're desperate to start talking because we love talking about ourselves.
Because we have the solution to bring.
Yeah. So we don't listen to the question. And people may talk confidently and authoritatively for 3 or 4 minutes. And unfortunately not answer the question, or at least not prove that they've got the skill or competency that question was designed to explore. You know, if you think about exam papers, and it's been a while since I've done an exam, but I imagine that there are people sitting exams right now And I bet you every single exam paper says at the top, please read the entire question before answering it. And they put that there deliberately on every exam paper because lots of people don't read the question properly and they end up answering something completely different. I just think somebody should go into the interview room with a big megaphone and go, please listen to the whole question before you start answering it. Maybe people would actually prove they've got the skills and competencies that each question is designed to explore. So that, to me, is issue number one. I actually did a training course on deep listening a while back. It was fascinating. And that ability to listen to somebody and clear your mind and not actually think about what you're going to say in response until you've heard everything that they wanted to say is a real art. And it's actually amazing what happens when you have conversations in that way. But I guess I'd just encourage people to just ever so slightly focus on listening a little bit more whilst that question is being asked, and then give yourself enough time to process it before mouth opens and words start coming out.
I know with my wife that I'm very eager to offer solutions, and partly that's male dominated generally. But if I'm sitting there with a notepad and paying attention to the full thing that she's explaining to me, I can sit there and take it all in and not have to worry about answering right away. My mentality is very different, and perhaps that's similar to an interview. You are able to take notes and be thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great analogy. And then the next mistake people make is almost the opposite. A lot of people are actually quite modest and very uncomfortable with the word I. I think if we look at the human psychology, we are by and large pack animals. I noticed this, and I'm quite antisocial, to be perfectly honest. So when I go to the cinema, I'll quite happily sit in the corner away from everybody else, away from the rustling of popcorn and things. But you'll notice people actually group together.
Is that safety in numbers and the herd mentality?
Yeah, exactly. And so when we talk about the collective, using the word we, we're very comfortable with that. But when we say the word I, it kind of sticks in your throat. It doesn't feel right. You feel emotions of separation and aloneness and being exposed. So this is something people aren't always comfortable with. So they're in an interview and they get asked a question. And actually, I personally picked up some interview coaching with a gentleman, very senior gentleman in the IT industry recently, and all the way through the interview he kept talking about what we had done, i.e. him and his team. I gave him feedback and I said, look, that's great, but I want to know what you did, what you owned, what you delivered, not what your team did, because there's no vacancy for your team. Just one person. And he said, yeah, but I'm that's my management style. I'm very collaborative. I like to give accountability to my team. And I said, that's all great. But in the interview, you're better off talking about I and what you did. Obviously, reference your team. But that's a very, very common problem or fault that people that gets people in interviews. So easy thing to fix, but nevertheless, it's something that if you don't realize you're doing, it can be quite frustrating for the person that's interviewing you.
And it is a balance, right? So if we think about it from a board role, you as an individual are there to add value, but you are collectively working with, say, the dozen other members to come up with important decisions. So you need to be able to do both the I and the we.
Yeah, absolutely. And the third thing that I think is quite interesting, really, because you would have thought that this is something that people would have covered off. But whenever I say to people, do you know yourself? They'll usually say, of course I do. Of course I know myself. It's me. And then we'll start digging into that a little bit and talking about whether they know themselves personally and emotionally opposed to professionally. And most people, when they actually drill down, realize that they don't know themselves professionally. Being on the job market is a little bit like being day one in a job as a salesperson. selling something technical that you have no idea what it is or what it does. If you don't know what you are and what you do and how you might benefit an organization, you've not been through that thought process of really defining what that is. And we're sort of talking about some of the points we covered in the other two.
Right. I was just going to say this links back to the previous time you visited episode 17. We did a deep dive into personal branding because you know exactly your unique selling points that you're going to be able to share with an organization that's helpful. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. If you don't know what your unique selling points, your value proposition, your achievements and track record and all the things that you've done in your career, if you can't recall some of the examples of things that you've done, then you're going to struggle. So the real key takeaway here is to learn yourself, to really, really know yourself on a professional level. And if you can do that, you'll perform much better in interviews. I think people rely on their memory. I think they think if they're a strong candidate, they should be able to just recall examples from their memory bank. And you know what? No one can do that. You could be the most red hot candidate on earth, but if you go fishing in your memory bank, you're going to pull out one of two things: either the example that was the most recent, or the example that was etched into your mind because it created some kind of significant emotional response when it happened. But you won't necessarily recall the most relevant and best example. So don't rely on your memory bank. You need to map out all the key things you've done in your career well in advance and learn them. I remember my dad said to me a long time ago, I'm talking like 30 odd years ago, I said, Dad, I'm just not very good at exams. We're talking about exams. I'm not very good at exams. And remember, his big booming voice said to me, son, it's not the exam that's difficult. It's doing the damn revision. I'm like, you're so right. Maybe if I did more revision, the exam would be easy.
Well, it's funny you say that. I was just thinking similarly, practice makes perfect. And I was envisioning back when I was applying to business schools and going to Wharton for my MBA. And I remember on the way to one of the interviews, I was rehearsing in my head. We talked about the STAR format: situation, task, action, result, of the likely questions you're going to have and the answers you want to give so that they're rehearsed, they're professional, you know what they are. And that's basically what you're talking about here. You have to know your information. You have to be ready for the questions with the answers.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about revising yourself and yourself professionally so that the interview becomes easy.
That makes logical sense. And then, so what are the strategies and I think we're automatically segueing this just naturally, what are the strategies we can do to be better about it? What are the keys to being successful in your interviewing? Yeah, well, the first thing leading on from what we've just said there is creating what we call a career autobiography, which is really an autobiography in its truest sense, but of everything you've done professionally, every project, every achievement, every success, every failure, everything that was significant. Write them all down in that methodology that you've just mentioned, Alexander, the STAR methodology. What was the situation? What was the task? What were your actions? And what was the result? Within that, make sure that you mention the name of the company and your job title. That's key. Write them all down. And then you'll have a chart of maybe 50, 60 things that you've done throughout your career. And then you can start assigning skills to them experiences. And then when you're preparing for an interview, you know what skills they're looking for, you can then go to your career autobiography, which, by the way, is probably a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, I loved how you described that last time. You made it very logical. I'm a logic-based person. You've got different tabs based on perhaps on the different skills that come out of it, so it's all structured and organized.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, you think, right, I'm going to need to talk about project management in this particular, well, actually, that's probably a bad example, but let's just say it stands true. Project management. So you click your little project management tab in your spreadsheet and up comes some examples, projects you've delivered. Maybe another one is about influencing and mediating, as a board advisor or a non-exec director, mediating between conflicting agendas in the boardroom that's a very useful skill to have. So maybe you click your tab that you've called mediating, and up pops some examples of when you've mediated between different factions of people with different agendas. And you learn these examples. And then when you're in the interview and you get asked a question about, give me an example of when you've successfully handled conflict within the workplace, then you refer to the mediation examples that you've just learned. And, you're always super prepared. You've always got an answer. The only time you haven't got an answer is if you genuinely don't have that skill.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
So that's that. Coming back to STAR. Now, a lot of people, when they're giving an example, will ramble. So we call this the ramble prevention technique. In other words, STAR. So if you're asked to give an example of when you've done something, and I'd say it out loud, we call it mental signposting. The first thing I would do is say the name of the company. When I was working for blah, 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 the situation was, and then describe the situation. At the time, I was a, commercial director, and my task was, and then describe the task. My actions were, then describe 5 or 6 actions, and the result was, and then describe the result. If I answer questions in that way, and I make it natural, there will never be a situation where I ramble, because it's easy. I've given myself the framework. I've made my whole communication framework foolproof.
Obvious.
So STAR is incredibly powerful. One of my favorite methodologies of all time, that one.
So those are, I think, simple ways that we can all execute, right? So you've practiced them in STAR, and now you're helping yourself remember them and share that information very easily. But some of the questions are hard, right? So they're going to ask you those, and STAR may or not be applicable, right? There's the classic one, tell me about yourself. How do you recommend answering that?
That's a great one, is that, Alexander? And I think that when people hear that, what they hear is, give me your life story. And I'll tell you a funny little story. This a long time ago, I was doing some interview coaching with a gentleman in London, and we had all the recording equipment set up. Me and a colleague, one side of the desk, Michael, the other side of the desk. We had a whole interview prepared. My first question was, so Michael, tell me about yourself. No word of a lie. He started off with, well, Matt, in 1968, school. 20 minutes later, he was just about to 1975. So we had to stop him and say, okay, Michael, just let's come out of role play, and I had to sort that out. But yeah, I think people hear, give me your life story. What it actually means is, I want to hear you speak. It's an icebreaker.
Isn't it? I want to hear your elevator pitch, is the way I've been told.
A little bit of that, yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of that. What I would recommend you do is you start off by telling people what you are. I would then do a very quick précis of your career. So I left university, and first job was doing this, and then I moved on to that, and then I ended up doing this. But within that, weave in your elevator pitch. What is it that you're really good at? So if you remember from the last session, I talked about me being very good at building things from new. So how I might answer that question. So, okay, well, Matt, tell me about yourself. Okay, well, I'm obviously Matt. Nice to meet you. I'm a very experienced, let's pretend I've sold my business, by the way, and I'm on the market for a commercial director role. So I'm an experienced commercial director. What I'm all about is developing things from new, building new businesses and new revenue streams in new markets. I started my career when I left university, actually selling advertising into a local newspaper in Norfolk, and then quickly moved on and ended up joining. This was an Enterprise Rent-A-Car, first came to the UK. I joined Enterprise Rent-A-Car on their management trainee program, believe it or not. And I worked with them for about 5 years. But again, I ended up opening lots of new branches for them in the UK. And actually my final role they'd bought a competitor that had gone out of business. And my final role was to go down to Brighton and transform that business from being unprofitable to profitable. So again, it was opening up new things, developing new markets, I was actually the first manager in the UK to make profit. So, building new things, transforming things. I then ended up working in recruitment as a headhunter, and I did everything from junior contract recruitment through to senior exec headhunting. And again, I ended up in a senior management role, setting up new divisions in new areas, actually carved a niche in the risk and compliance sector in the banking world, setting up something completely from new and building it up. And then in 2006, I decided to set up this business, the CV and Interview Advisors, and took that from just being little old me to one of the biggest and renowned personal branding and career development companies we're based in the UK, but we service an international client base. I sold that business in 2019 for a 7-figure sum. Wouldn't that be great? And now I'm looking for commercial director role. So here I am. Now, that was a bit long-winded, but that's how I would answer that question.
Now, I've heard that there might be 2 different ways to answer depending on the wording that the questioner asks. So I've heard the format of tell me about yourself. I've also heard walk me through your resume. And I've been told walking me through your resume means give me that brief chronological so I can understand this piece of paper in front of me. Whereas tell me about yourself is a bit more open-ended. You've got a little bit more leeway for how you go about it. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite an ambiguous question, having a little bit of inside knowledge about what they're looking for. But I don't think anybody could criticize you for interpreting it in either way, because you've answered the question that they've asked you. What you don't want to do is just bore them for 10 minutes or 30 minutes like Michael did. But if you can give people a very quick tour of your career, weave in your elevator pitch and your key selling points, tell people what you are, and then finish up by telling people why you're there in that interview room, what your situation is, if you like. I think you've covered off everything that you could possibly ever hope to cover off, regardless of that individual's meaning or interpretation of the question that they've just asked you.
Right. And now there's another tricky question that we get, and it's, do you have any questions for us? It's usually the last few minutes of the interview. We wanted to save some time for you to ask questions of us. How do you recommend tackling that?
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about an interview being a sales call. And certainly I've been to lots of sales calls, sales visits. And I don't recall ever presenting my solution to a prospect and then just standing up and leaving the room. I'm all for handling objections and seeing the whites of their eyes and, asking them what they think of the solution that I've just presented to them. So if that works in a sales environment, then I'm pretty sure it works in an interview because you are selling yourself. So this is all about objection handling. It's about using sales techniques in an interview. So when asked the question, do you have any questions for us? I would say, well, yes, I do. Really enjoyed meeting with you today. Sounds like a great opportunity. Really like the company. For that reason, I would like to know whether you have any reservations about me and my suitability for the position. And then just go quiet and let them tell you if they have any reservations about you. Maybe they'll say, well, you know what, we're just not sure that you've got enough experience in this area. And then you can be like, oh my God, really? Well, let's talk about that. I'm sorry, I've not made myself clear. I actually have loads of experience in that area. It might be that they fall off their chair and go, no, it's all fine. Nothing you can do. But I think you've got to give yourself an opportunity to handle the objections that they might have about you or any reservations about you there and then in the interview room. And by asking that question, which is quite a savvy question, I think you're showing the behaviors that you would expect to use in that particular job anyway. It's a savvy question, caught in objections, and you're going to give yourself the best chance possible of finding out if they've got something that's niggling them, which might, prevent them from progressing you to the next stage of the interview process or offering you a job.
I think that's brilliant. You have that time there to address it. You've spent all the effort to get there and to be successful, and it gives you perhaps a misunderstanding to be overcome if there are any problems. I like that a lot. And Matt, I am amazed over this series of how much we have covered in terms of people positioning themselves to be able to get to those board opportunities and how they'll cover it off and handle it well there. And you have been so good to our audience. You have offered lots of discounted possibilities that they could go forward. And I know with today you were talking about another special, unique one. I believe you have a on-demand interview coaching video series. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer a one-to-one interview coaching session, which we price quite keenly over here, but it's available to our entire global client base. We normally charge, I think, £65 plus VAT. But what we did is we recorded the coaching session, and we're offering it to the listeners of today's podcast completely free of charge. So if anybody would like a sort of on-demand recorded version of our 1 hour interview coaching session, which kind of covers some of the topics we've covered today, but some more things as well, that's available to all the listeners completely free of charge. All I need you to do is just drop me an email and we'll get it over to you via email. And I'm sure Alex will share my email address with you in the notes.
Well, Matt, you have been wonderfully amazing in your knowledge sharing with us. Very generous over this is the third episode over the last few months, and we've covered so much from just starting out with the resume to the personal branding, LinkedIn, thought leadership, the interviewing techniques. And it's been a joy to have you on the show. I would just appreciate you and thank you for sharing all those insights and helping all of our audience to be more boardroom bound.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much, Alexander, and good luck, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I'm really grateful for Matt Craven joining us again. So this is the third episode now where he's shared the key skill sets and insights that you need to be successful in your search for a board role. And today we talked all about executive level interview technique. And we got great insight into the key questions that you're going to be asked, the mistakes that people often made, and the keys to success. So remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get links to all of the resources we've talked about, including the special offers that Matt has made available, many of them for free, to our members in our audience. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, especially the great information and resources that we were getting, I'd ask that you take 30 seconds to leave a review on iTunes. The iTunes reviews are one of the best ways we get out word about the podcast. So thanks for joining me in this episode of the show. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be boardroom bound.